performed an off-duty detail. What was your understanding regarding booking?
That it just showed proof that I was there.
Okay. You testified that you did traffic when you did an off-duty detail, correct?
Yes.
Make sure the traffic flows, the pedestrians are safe. Now, that's fixed post, correct?
Yes.
Judge, I'm going to object. I'm certainly providing counsel with a little bit of latitude when it comes to leading on some basic questions. I think it's getting to the point now where we're getting into topics that are more significant, and I would ask Your Honor.
The objection is
Thank
sustained.
What?
Go ahead. Open-ended
How were you paid for your off-duty detail?
We fill a voucher out, as stated, and we submit it into a mailbox in our districts. Then someone from the off-duty office picks up the vouchers and they submit it into their payroll, and we get payment from that.
Now, S2R, your off-duty pay voucher, whose supervisor signature is on there?
And it says here Sergeant Majority.
How did Sergeant Majuri sign that?
With a pen?
No.
His name?
Okay. With respect with when you were working the off-duty detail, what were you supposed to do to get
I had
Sergeant
to
Majuri's-
submit this voucher to the supervisor to show him that that was my,
Okay, how did you do that?
I gave it to him.
Okay, how did you give it to him?
Oh, it was in my back pocket, folded up as such, in a circle, put it in my back pockets. We stand by, and then once he shows up, we place it.
Okay, so he showed up, correct?
Yes.
All right. So when he showed up and booked you at 1800 on his activity sheet, is that when he signed that payment voucher? Do you recognize that?
Yes,
Is that your name and your signature on top?
yes.
And which date and shift does it list?
His dates here is 6/2/2014. The hour start time is 6 a.m. to 10 a.m.
And what is the detail project name and location?
It is Skyway Detail on Christopher Columbus Drive and Marin Boulevard.
Is that your handwriting?
Yes, it is.
On the foreman authorized agent, do you recognize the supervisor's name on there?
It's off. I'm not too sure what that is.
Okay.
I can't read it from here looking at this sheet here.
Can you look at the S5F?
Okay, I have it.
Okay. That's a pay voucher, right?
Yes, sir, it is.
Whose pay voucher is that?
That says Robert Majority.
And
Sergeant Robert Majority, excuse me.
what date and shift does it indicate? It's
6/2/2014.
which shift?
I'm sorry, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. In the area of Marin Boulevard and Christopher Columbus Drive.
So that's the same date, same shift, and same location as your pay voucher, is that correct?
Yes, that's what it says, yes.
Okay. Do you have any independent recollection of working this shift with Sergeant Majority?
I did.
Do you remember this date?
Yeah. He was with me that day, yeah.
Okay. Now, is this an independent recollection based on paperwork, or do you remember this day?
I don't remember that day vaguely, but if I was there with him that day, then I was there. The paper
Generally, do you remember working DOT details with Sergeant Majority?
I have, yes.
Okay. Do you know Michael O'Neill?
No,
Do you know Mike Maed? Sorry, that's right. Do you know Mike Maed?
I know of him, yes.
Do you have any recollection of ever working a DOT detail with Mike Maed?
No.
on this form, can you read the top, or what's it called?
It says, Jersey City Police Department's Pulaski Skyway Detail, date 6/2/2014.
Can you go down to the East District?
Okay,
Do you see your name?
I do.
Okay. Can you tell the court what assignment you were scheduled to work?
Christopher Columbus and Marin, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m., 6/2/2014.
And who were you supposed to work with on that day, according to this, we call this the master sheet?
Christopher Columbus and Marin, and that's going to be Sergeant Robert Majuri, 6 a.m., 10 a.m.
What I'd like to do is start with the voucher from May 20th. Do you recall being questioned by Mr. Cho about that? I'm going to put it up on the Elmo so you can see.
Okay.
What's the exhibit marking?
That's exhibit S2R. Thank you. Can you see that, Officer Kang?
I do. I can see it.
So that's your voucher from May 20th, 2014. And on that day, you were working Center in York, correct?
Yes.
And on your voucher, you put your start time as 1800, your end time as 1900, correct?
Yes.
So that's from 6 to 7, correct?
Yes.
Okay. The normal shift for a Skyway job is 4 hours, correct?
Yes.
And because you didn't work 4 hours, you only put in for 1 hour, correct? And is it fair to say that it was your practice that if you were going to work less than 4 hours, that you would put the correct time on your voucher? Was it also your practice to let the supervisor know the reason why you weren't working the whole shift?
That is the proper way to do things, yes.
And that was your practice?
Right.
And you can see at the bottom of the exhibit S2R that there was handwriting indicating the reason why you were only putting in for the 1 hour, right?
Right.
Now, is that your handwriting?
No, it's not my hand.
No. Do you recall whether or not, strike that, to your knowledge, did Sergeant Majuri write that?
He did.
He did. Okay, so that's May 20th. I want to fast forward now to June 2nd, which you were asked about before. And I want to get clear in my mind what it is exactly you remember from that day. So as you sit here today, as I listened to your testimony, I wasn't really sure whether or not, as you sit here today, you actually have an independent recollection of being on the post that day and who you were with that day. Do you have such an independent recollection?
Sometimes, not all the time.
I mean, generally I understand, listen, sometimes I don't remember too well either. But as you sit here today, what I'm asking you is, do you remember on June the 2nd being on the post and who you were with that day?
On that day, no.
You don't?
No.
Okay. And you actually remember when you gave a statement to the prosecutor's office telling them, quote, that day, I don't recall who I was working with that day, honestly. Do you remember telling them that?
I did.
So, here today in this courtroom, you couldn't say whether or not you were working with Majuri on the post at Columbus and Marin that day, correct?
I can say that, yes.
Well, can you say it from your independent recollection, or can you say it only because you look at the paperwork?
I'm going by the paperwork, one, and I do remember working with Officer Majuri, Sergeant Majuri at that time.
But you remember working with him generally, but do you remember working with him on June 2nd, is the question.
If the paperwork says that, then I was there with him.
Okay, so just so we're clear,
Right.
Just note the difference.
Right.
If the paperwork is refreshing your recollection, that's one thing. But if you have an independent memory, June 2nd, 2014,
Then I can't say that, no.
okay.
okay,
Very
that's the
good.
distinction, okay?
Okay.
Okay, so you were asked some questions about your voucher for June 2nd. Do you recall being asked that on direct examination?
I was.
Do you recall what time you got at your post on June 2nd?
No.
But if you looked at your voucher, it might help refresh your recollection as to when you got at your post.
Technically, the voucher says 1500 start. That's what it says. It could have been from 2:45. That could have been there. It could have been 2:50, 2:59 at that time. I don't know.
Well, let me show you the voucher, okay? I'm going to put it up on the elbow. It's S5E. And you can see that up, Sir Kang?
Yes.
So that's your voucher for June 2nd, 2014, right?
Yes, it is.
And it lists a start time of 6 a.m. and an end time of 10 a.m., correct? Okay, so on that day, you put in for 4 hours, correct?
I did.
So is it fair to say that you started at 6 a.m.? Because you wouldn't have put on your voucher start time of 6 a.m. if you didn't start at 6 a.m., correct?
Correct.
You're only entitled to put in to be paid for the time you worked, correct?
Because I was there at 6 a.m.
Because you were there at 6 a.m. Correct. And that is the patrol sheet or the supervisor's off-duty activity sheet for June 2nd, 2014, correct?
Yes.
And that corresponds to your voucher in S5E, correct?
Correct.
Same deal, okay. Now, have you ever seen one of these patrol sheets before? No. But you see that all the way on the left-hand side, there's a column that lists times, right?
Yes.
And then there's a corresponding column for the officer that corresponds with the time, correct?
Yes.
And then there's another corresponding to time that lists the work location, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, the very first entry on that patrol log is for Columbus and Marin, correct?
Correct.
And that's the post that you were working that day, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And according to the patrol sheet, at 6:15, Sergeant Majuri was booked by O'Mara at 6:15, correct, at Columbus and Marin?
That's what it says, yeah.
Now, there's no indication on the patrol sheet that at the time O'Mara booked Majuri, he also booked you, correct?
He did.
At 6:15?
No. No, he didn't. No, he corrected me at a different time. I just states on record.
So, are you referring to the location on the patrol sheet where O'Mara actually books you at 8 a.m., correct?
That's what it says, yes.
Okay. So from the paperwork, it appears that you weren't on the Columbus and Marin post at 6:15 a.m. when O'Mara booked Majori, correct?
I was there.
Okay. I understand, because your voucher
Right.
says 6 to 10 a.m.
Yeah.
And between the two, between your voucher and O'Mara's patrol sheet,
Yes.
according to your testimony, what's accurate is your voucher,
Right.
correct? And what is inaccurate is O'Mara's patrol sheet.
I don't know how Sergeant O'Mara does his booking. He has his own way of doing stuff. If he decides to put a different number time frame on there, that's on him, and I have no idea how that works. I have no, I've only seen that sheet before, and how they run their call logs on that. I don't know how it works. He might have saw me for a different time. I don't know.
But you, as far as you're concerned, it's your voucher that's correct, because you worked 6 to 10,
Yes.
and you got paid for that, and you got paid for work that you actually performed, which means that to the extent that O'Mara doesn't book you at 6:15, that patrol sheet is inaccurate.
If that's what O'Mara wrote down, that's what he wrote down. I don't know.
Now, he books you at 8 a.m., correct?
That's what it says, yes.
As you sit here today, do you have any explanation for, based upon your independent recollection, as to why O'Mara might not have booked you until 8 a.m.?
I do
what's been marked S5E. And that's your voucher. We went over that, correct? Now, I'd like you to take a look at the start time on that voucher. You see that? Now, at the top of the 6, it looks like there is a horizontal line. Do you see that?
I do.
It looks as though, to me, that you may have started writing a 7, but then instead wrote a 6. Correct? So, is it possible that you actually didn't show up until 7 a.m.?
Sustain. Just
No.
rephrase the question with regards to possibilities. Counsel, sustaining
Because
it.
if you
Sure.
if you look at my 6 on my date, it's almost like a 7 too as well, if you look at that math. So it's almost the same sequence that I put my 6s down, so it can't be a 7.
So based upon your paperwork, you don't believe that you didn't show up until 7 a.m. You believe you showed up at 6 a.m.
No, I was there 6
Okay. Now, there are a couple of other 6s on your paperwork. There's one for your social security number. Do you see that?
Yes.
And it doesn't have that horizontal line, does it?
No, it doesn't.
And also on the date worked area, there's another 6. Do you see that?
I do.
And that doesn't have the horizontal line either, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Detective Signorelli asked you a couple of questions about that patrol sheet, didn't he?
He did.
He did. He didn't ask you why you weren't booked in at 6:15 with Sergeant Majuri, did he?
He did not.
He didn't ask you why you weren't booked in until 8 a.m., did you? Did he? Okay. At that portion of your statement, what Detective Signorelli was asking you about was your voucher, correct?
Yes.
And Detective Signorelli didn't ask you any questions about your start time and the number 6 that you filled in, correct?
No, he did not. No.
He didn't ask you any questions about whether that start time might have matched the booking time on the patrol sheet, correct?
No.
Didn't ask you any questions about whether or not the end time on that voucher might have corresponded to the booking sheet, correct?
It says, he just gave me the time of when it started and finish time. That's all it stated.
And he just questioned you as if there were no anomalies between the patrol sheet and your voucher, correct?
Right? Yes.
It's fair to say that all of the questions, and let me go back. Actually, Signorelli wasn't the only person participating in that statement, correct? Sergeant Josford was there, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
Do you know Sergeant Josford?
Internal affairs.
He's with the Internal Affairs Division for the Jersey City Police Department, correct? So if he wanted to, he could have certainly asked you questions about the patrol sheet and about your voucher, correct?
He could have, yeah.
And he did not.
No.
It's fair to say that the singular focus of the questioning during your statement was on my client, Joseph Ascalise, and Officer Maeda, correct?
Yeah, yes.
And as far as questioning was concerned, these officers were blind to anything else, weren't they?
Objection, Judge, as to what these officers were blind to?
Okay, sustained. Rephrase.
They only asked you questions about my client, correct?
I'm sorry.
They only asked you questions about my client, correct?
No, they asked me a question about my detail where I was that day.
And how it related to my client.
I don't know that, sir. I don't know what their objection was, what their reasoning was.
Do you recall ever having calling a supervisor and saying that, hey, you haven't gone out to me yet?
I believe I have, yes.
You have. And do you recall whether or not the supervisor might have said words to the effect that, listen, I can't make it out there, the traffic or whatever, there's an emergency, sign the voucher for me?
No.
Never happened?
Not to me.
I want you to take a look at that exhibit that's in front of you. The first page is your pay voucher, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that's for July 8th, and it's for the 3 to 7 shift, correct?
Yes.
And that's your signature in the officer signature area, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And the location that you put down is Bright and Center, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recognize the signature below?
I can't make it out, I don't know.
I want you to take a look at the next page. That's a patrol sheet for July 8th, which is the same date as your voucher, correct?
Yes.
And based upon the times on the left-hand side, that's for the 3 to 7 shift, correct? Yes?
Sir. Yes, sir.
And do you see the name of the supervisor printed on the top left of that document?
I do.
And what's that name?
Vincent Corso.
Okay. And do you see the signature right across from it?
Yes.
Now, go to the very end of the document, the last 2 pages, and you'll see that that's what we've been referring to as the master list.
Okay.
On the bottom third for the East District, you're listed to work Center and Bright on the 3 to 7 shift, and Sergeant Corso is scheduled to be your supervisor, correct?
Yes, sir, that's what it says, yeah.
Okay, so that corresponds with this patrol sheet, and you working at Center and Bright that day, right?
Yes.
Okay. What I'd like you to do is take a look at the signature on Sergeant Corso's patrol sheet.
This one?
Yes.
Okay.
And compare that to the signature on your voucher. Do those 2 signatures look different to you?
It does.
Now, behind the patrol log is the voucher for Sergeant Corso, and then the vouchers for the other officers who he booked that day. Take a look at those signatures. And tell me if they're different from the signature on your pay voucher. Do they look different?
They do, yes.
Does this refresh your recollection as to whether or not Sergeant Corso might have called you up that day and said, I can't get to you, just sign my name to it, I trust you?
I don't recall, sir.
Either way.
Either way, I don't recall.
The first page of that exhibit is your voucher for June 10th or 11th, and the shift is the 3 to 7 shift, correct? And that's your signature?
Yes, sir.
And the post location that you put is Center in Graham, correct?
Yes, sir.
And the name printed for the foreman authorized agent is Sergeant Trowbridge, correct? Or Trowbridge, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Now, on the date, on both dates, the date worked and the date next to your signature, the 10 is crossed out and someone has written in the number 11 above it. Do you see that?
I do.
Do you know if you did that or if someone else did that?
I'm not too sure.
You're not too sure?
Yeah.
Okay. So this voucher indicates that you worked either on June 10th or June 11th, correct?
Yes, sir.
Take a look at the second page, which is Trowbridge's patrol log for June 10th. And you're listed in the second entry as working Center, Brandon Center on June 10th, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes.
So if June 11th was the date you wrote, and you don't know whether or not it was, I understand that. This patrol sheet seems to indicate that the correct date would have been June 10th, correct?
Yes, sir.
And the next page is the master sheet for June 10th. And if you look in the section for the East District, it has you working Grandin Center, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so that would further confirm that you likely worked that location on that date, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then the next document is the voucher for Officer, and I don't know if I'm going to get this pronunciation right, Masonette. Do you see that?
I do.
And that's for the 3 to 7 on June 11th, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that's also for Center and Grand, which is the same post on your voucher, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, Center and Grand is a one-man post, right?
Yes, it was. At that time, it was, yes.
Now I want to come up here because this gets a little bit confusing. So I'm gonna just direct your attention to the invoice form. And it's on the bottom right hand of the page. It has page number 23 of 27. And you see an entry for Gino Kang, that's you, correct?
Yes, sir.
On June 11th for the 3 to 7 shift, correct?
Yes.
And it indicates that you worked 4 hours and that you got paid, correct?
Yes.
And there's also an entry, 4, about 10 names down for Officer Masonette, correct?
Yes.
And it also indicates that he got paid on June 11th, correct?
Yes. That's good, sir.
So, I just want you to keep this together. So, 2 officers got paid for June 11th for the Center and Grand Street post, correct? At least it appears from the paperwork.
That's what it says.
And that's a one-man post, correct?
Yes, sir.
First page is your voucher, correct, for June 17th, 2014, the 6 to 10 a.m. shift, correct?
Correct.
And the location that you put on that voucher is for Center in York, correct?
Correct.
And do you recognize the foreman's signature underneath Center in York?
No.
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 Take a look at the next page. That's a patrol sheet for Sergeant J. Furch for June 17, 2014, the same day as your voucher, correct?
Yes, sir.
And on the very bottom, on line 15, turn to that. Sergeant Furch books you at 7:30, correct?
Yes, sir.
But he doesn't book you at Center in York. He books you at Center in Bright, doesn't he?
That's what it says, yes.
So, one of the documents has to be wrong, correct?
Correct.
And it's my understanding of your testimony that typically your vouchers are the vouchers that you rely upon, correct?
Correct, sir.
So in this situation, that based upon the paperwork, your voucher is correct, but it's the patrol log that is wrong.
I don't know that. I know my post was supposed to be there. But they do, you know.
Well, if your voucher is correct, then the booking information on the patrol log has to be incorrect because it's a different post, correct?
If that's what he wrote down, that's what he wrote. I don't know that. This is what he does.
Well, my question
I
is,
can't answer the question what the sergeant did that day.
my question is just simply based upon the paperwork. Also.
Yes.
2014?
Yes.
Okay. So, Mr. Alitel just asked you a bunch of questions about the signatures that are listed there, purporting to be Sergeant Corso, who was the district supervisor for the district you worked at particularly, right?
Yes.
Can you just take a look at the vouchers that are signed, which start at the 4th page of D70? Just quickly go through Ray Keegan as it goes through. Yeah, keep going. Keep going. Right from there. And just look at the vouchers that are signed. Just note where the signature is located, which line it's located on.
The second line.
Okay, so just look through them all real quick. Would you agree with me that there's a signature on each of the signature lines for those vouchers?
Yes.
Correct? And yours is signed on the, where it says print at the top. That's what your voucher is signed.
Right.
Okay. Now, do you ever recall submitting a voucher? You had testified earlier that there were times that the supervisor didn't come to book you in right away. You sometimes had a call to get them to come, correct?
Yes.
Do you ever recall submitting a voucher to get paid without a signature because the supervisor didn't show up that particular day?
Now, sometimes we ask the desk boss to sign it for us, also as for us as well.
Okay, all right. So, and this is during the time period of July 8th of 2014 that was occurring where you had the desk boss sign?
If the boss wasn't available, the desk boss would sign for us.
All right, and so when you got done with your shift, you'd go see the desk boss and he would sign on that?
He would.
He would, okay. And you would tell him that you were out at Brighton Center, for example. Here, I was out in Brighton Center and I worked the 4 hours, and he would say, okay, and he'd sign.
So I was, yes.
To show you were there, okay. Would he sign his own name, or would he just sign the district supervisor who was supposed to be the one that saw you?
He would, the district officer should sign his own name to show that he approved the voucher, yes.
Okay.
Wait, you have to speak up.
Yeah, speak up. I'll step back,
The desk boss would should sign his name.
His own name?
He should, yes.
Okay. But do you ever recall a situation where you submitted a voucher without a signature and it came back to you and said, where the Office of Off-Duty Employment said, we need to get a signature here for you to get paid? You remember that ever occurring?
Yes.
Okay. And what would you do when you got the voucher back without the signature?
I'd have to wait for I'd try to get in contact with the supervisor of that job and try to get in contact with him as a sign.
Okay. So if this were one of those occasions, which has a different signature, if this is one of those occasions, you'd go back to Corso at some point after you got the voucher back from Office of Off-Duty Employment, and you would ask him to sign the voucher, correct? And when you'd see him, you would explain to him that, you must have missed me, boss, on this particular day because it didn't get signed. Can you sign it for me? And he would sign it, correct?
Yes.
And he would rely upon the fact that you told him that you worked that day in order for him to sign. He wasn't booking you at that post on that day. That's fair to say, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay. Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Nothing, Your Honor. Very briefly, Judge.
Yeah.
I do have a couple things.
Wait, hold it. Judge. I believe this was Mr.
Oh,
Cho's witness.
this,
Mr. Cho's witness.
it is
And
Mr.
is it-
Cho's
So
list.
Mr. Cho should be handling it. I
Why?
don't think this is music.
Why is that, Judge? Why does it,
Well,
where does it say that we're not working together?
if you are working together, we should have continued the trial when you were out sick those 2 days.
Oh, Judge, that's
Okay?
not
No,
fair.
seriously.
Oh,
I am very
Judge.
seriously, because I didn't think that you were working together. I thought you had your
Oh, that's not
witnesses,
fair,
he had
Judge.
his witnesses.
That's simply not fair.
No, I'm bringing it up now. I really am. It's because I didn't think you were. I thought you had your own separate witnesses. So if you want a moment, we'll bring him back tomorrow. You can talk to him as far as where you want to cross-examine him, but
Judge, where in the court rules does it say that one
we
person?
took 2 days
We
that I,
did-
listen, this is a six, and I am not saying that I would not go back and give you those 2 days, recognizing you were seriously ill. That is not what I'm saying. What I am noting for the record is, it appeared to this court that there's 2 prosecutors on this case, you divvied up the work, you both have your own separate assignments. Otherwise, and I wouldn't have put Mr. Cho in that week especially because this is a long trial. There's a lot of resources that we are devoting to this, the court, and when I say we, I'm sure the parties are as well, but I'm talking about the court resources.
Judge, I'm sorry.
So on that day, I did, because if it's something like that, and you're telling me that Mr. Cho, when you're not available, can take this case and try it all, and you don't have your separate witnesses, and you didn't divvy up that way, then that's how I would have looked at it.
I
And
don't
that's the only reason I bring that up.
Frankly, Judge, I don't even know how to respond with respect to, I just don't.
You don't have to respond.
Because there's no,
I'm noting it for the record.
but where in the court rules does it say that if two attorneys are working on a case, where in the court rules does it say that they can switch the orders of cross-examination or addressing witnesses? Where, you have extended that courtesy to the defense counsel for the purposes of.
Defense counsel,
They have,
counsel, they are asking questions. They could, as a matter of fact, if they wanted to, they could drag this case out forever, till eternity, and each one of them can ask the same questions that the other one asked, because each client,
and that wouldn't be a waste of the court's time?
it would be, but however, I would
And
be
you wouldn't have the
infringing.
ability to control that, Your
Counsel,
Honor?
you asked me a question, right? It would be. However, I would still have to give it to them because it's their defendant, each defendant, even though they're trying this case together, each defense counsel is entitled to cross and confront their witnesses as per our Constitution. That's the difference with the defense versus the state. I would have to, but they aren't doing that. They have decided not to do that, and they said that in the beginning of the case. How many questions do you have of this witness? And are these the same questions that Mr. Cho would have of his witness? I mean, he's prepped him, he's the one that,
Again, Judge, I don't know where it is, with what
They didn't
authority is
cite
it says that.
counsel.
Judge, I'll withdraw it. If he's gonna ask the questions, he can ask the questions. Go ahead. Let's get him off the list.
all right,
Go ahead.
withdrawn.
Could you refer to, well, let me ask a question. Do you recall being questioned about your statement D69?
Yes.
Okay. With respect to D69, do you recall whether you were specifically asked, do you know an officer by the name of Michael Maetti? Do you recall being asked that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what was your response?
I say I know of it.
Okay.
Well, on the report, and the paper says yes, yes.
And what was your response on the paper?
I said yes.
And do you recall being asked, have you ever worked in off-duty detail with Officer Maetti?
No.
And do you recall being asked that question?
Yes.
And what was your answer?
No.
And then you recall being asked, no, never worked on the same post as him?
No.
And what was your answer?
No.
I have nothing further.